Let me start by introduction of the panel. I will request each one of you to introduce yourself. Charco, with
Sure,
you.
yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Charco Patterson. I was telling on earlier. I actually joined Google in this very office just in the room across the hall. That was where I had my orientation about 7.5 years ago. So I've been at Google for that period of time. Most of my career at Google has been on what we call our customer engineering team, which is our customer-facing, technical teams that work with customers, kind of breaking down our products, helping understand, recommendation on solution architectures and things of that sort. My background is mostly in the life sciences industry. Prior to Google, I actually worked for IBM Watson Health as a product manager in their architecture organization. I reported the chief architect for Watson Health for about 3 years. So I was there from the incubation of that organization starting to, whatever you'd want to call it today. But if someone wants to pull me aside, I'd be happy to give some perspective of my experience from an inside out perspective. But even hearing the talk earlier today and some of the things that we're innovating around, in many ways, I think the vision, I'll call it just for humanity's purpose, right? The vision was there about how do we synthesize all this medical literature? We can't do it in a human way. And to see the computational breakthroughs that we've had over the last decade from that time to now helps me realize some of the things that I wanted to work on, I wanted to build 10 years ago in that organization. And now seeing that that's much more feasible and frankly cost effective to do those things. Right now I manage a team that both has an expanded role covering our healthcare life sciences customers, as well as I've taken a new remit this year in our what we call our TMEG business, which is our telco, media, entertainment, and gaming verticals, which is pretty different from healthcare, although it's been very interesting to see some adjacencies. So I wonder if those topics might come up, but I'm starting to discover some things happening in our media and gaming customers that I think actually have a lot of interesting connectivity and kind of metaphorically related to some of the work we're doing. So for example, we're doing a lot of telemetry, real-time telemetry work in video games, right? Because we want to understand those things. Telemetry is a really important topic in the healthcare industry as well, whether it's in a hospital setting, whether it's in real-world evidence, whether it's a measure itself, things using like Fitbit devices and things like that. So I always enjoy kind of connecting different worlds together and seeing what innovation can kind of crossbreed between different areas. So happy to be here.
Thank you. Richard.
My name's Rich Gleason. I'm Vice President of R&D Technology at a company called Kylera. Came out of Stealth in September. I joined in November. We're a Bain Life Science funded company licensing a GLP-1 drug out of China and trying to bring that to the market in the US and the rest of the world. Prior to that, I was at Cerevel, a CNS company in schizophrenia, Parkinson's disease, also a Bain Life Science company. And prior to that in my career, I was on the other side of the fence. I wasn't on the sponsor side. I was on the service and sort of software side. Worked at a large CRO, ParExcel. Worked at a cognition measurement company, software called Cogstate. I founded an EDC company called Data Labs that was later acquired by ParExcel. So I've been sort of on both sides of the equation, both providing and now consuming sort of technology. And happy to talk more. Good chat.
All right. Dr. Martin.
Well, first of all, it's a real privilege and a pleasure to be here speaking with everybody. And I don't know if I could hold a candle to the other panelists, but I'll give you a little glimpse of my background. So I am Martin Alexander Gershon. I am a physician, an oncologist, and neuroscience and immunologist. I did my training at Columbia and Memorial Sloan Kettering for my graduate degree work, and before that at McGill. I am also a former FDA attorney with a public health background and a healthcare economics background. And currently, I actually for the past 15 years have been running Endeavor Venture Group, which is a venture capital firm. We've made 140 investments since 2009 in 94 companies. We also have a strategy consulting group, which focuses in on go-to-market strategies, growth strategies, and big, hairy, audacious goals. And we advise large tech companies, large pharma companies, as well as hyper-growth emerging companies who are revenue generating and need partnerships to accelerate their growth, need help in driving clinical trials, need help in financing. We also have a fairly robust communications and media group. So like my colleague here, I look for those intersections. And although I was driven kicking and screaming into social media 2.5 years ago, we managed to harvest about 2 million views on our webinars and interviews. We have a newsletter which you're all invited to join for free. We have about 27,000 subscribers over the past year. We have, I think, a robust platform that allows many of our partners and our work with young companies, particularly with Techstars, where I'm the senior executive investor in residence in healthcare, to be able to showcase the incredible things that they're envisioning and to look for partners and financing to be able to drive those things forward. Right now, a strong focus is our third fund. Our first was mostly biotech, which was launched in 2009 with the help of the Swiss government. It's a nice partner to have. And the second fund and the third fund are focused in really on health tech and particularly AI. And health tech for me is quite a broad category, which does include biotech, drug discovery, drug development, also includes medical devices, diagnostics, also includes things like clinical trials. And how do we create a better, more effective, efficient clinical trial with improving patient trial fit, for example, decentralization of clinical trials. And then finally, we look at ways to improve the hospital. And we do partner with a number of different hospitals. And here in New York, our principal partner is Mount Sinai and the Innovation Partner Group. We look to help the hospital in 3 ways. The first is by bringing in technology from our portfolio companies or companies who we are advising to improve the logistics within the hospital itself, improving surgical suite efficiency, improving emergency room efficiency, improving billing, improving discharge planning, hospital logistics for pharmacy and for supply chain are some of the things internally. And then as an extension of this, we try to drive many of our young companies into their new accelerator program, which we believe is an indication of the hospital of the future, where the hospital is not just a sickness center or an acute care facility, but it is a growth engine, hopefully backed by venture and large pharma and big tech. That combination can be very powerful. And so we look to drive Techstars companies, plug and play companies, mass challenge companies, all of whom I either invest in or partner with or are mentoring for, into the accelerator program at Mount Sinai. And we look again to look at later stage companies who we work with, like in silico medicine, to be able to drive some of their more advanced assets into AI-driven technology and clinical trial development. So in a nutshell, again, thrilled to be here and talk about some of these things and how that intersects across different sectors within Google is super exciting. And a quick shout out to my good friend Bill Fitzgerald, who I don't see is here today, who heads up the biotechnology program at Google. Thank you for the invitation.
That's great. And a quick introduction to myself. I'm Barinder Marhok. I head the Global Healthcare Life Sciences Business Unit for Quantify. I'm a pharmacist who turned into a technologist after spending a few years in pharma doing clinical trials and getting regulatory approvals for some of the products. And then I've been on a technology and analytics journey, focusing on transformation in pharmaceutical industry using technology. So we at Quantify are now looking at how do we bring AI to life, enabling partners like Google, we work extensively with Google, use their ecosystem to actually bring solutions, implement them in the customers. But then also now beginning to use the Google platform to create our own IP. And now we are working with AI-centric partners and bringing their solutions to market. So those are the three ways we are beginning to work now. And Eversana is our partner for one of the initiatives, and they're here in the room today. So with that, let's get the first question going. Charco, for you, the biggest thing actually driving the whole AI revolution is data,
Yeah.
right? So what are the, and when we were just having a sidebar conversation, that the biggest pain point is, one thing we hear is we are running out of data to train.
Yeah.
The second thing we hear is, the data quality issues. So what are we doing now? What is the industry trying to do to tackle some of these things?
Yeah. I think there's a couple different perspectives on it, right? Because you want to disambiguate the data concerns with more generalizable models that are kind of more multi-purpose, like I'll call it like the internet-facing models. I'll call them, right? Your Geminis, your ChatGPTs, and so on. Because there's still a wealth of data that sits privately or semi-privately in other places that's not on the public internet that is still completely untapped, right? So when you ask, are we running out of data for a model to be trained to write good English papers in college? Yes, we are running out of data, right? Because we have access to a lot of information, right? We just announced Gemini 2.5. OpenAI recently announced 4.0. Doesn't have the quite fanfare that it used to have in the early days. In my early days, I mean 12, 13 months ago. And I think it's because we're hitting a crest where actually, for all the generalizable data that's out there, we've kind of hit kind of a maximum, I think, in some respects. So I think in that world, a lot of conversation is now going into synthesized data. Can you synthesize data with some level of quality that then is able to feed back into the machine, right? There's also topics around, is really a larger language model the solution, right? Is more data actually the solution anymore? It was for a time when we got to a certain inflection point, but now the question is actually, should there be multiple small language models, right, as an example, that are specialized in different domains? It's been a while since I've read textbooks on civilization, but they talk about how a civilization can be gauged by its maturity by the level of specialization in its organization, right? It's not just everyone hunts together, but now we can create specialized worlds, and that's how we advance civilization. So I wonder if there's metaphorically a similar model on how we evolve, how we think about AI in general, right? Is it really about AIG having some uber AI model that knows everything, or is it really about having specialization and figure out how to create the right connectivity for those things to coordinate and work together? I think in our industry, there is still an immense untapped resources of data, right? It still sits in many private, siloed organizations, right? We have things like Odyssey, we have different, organizations and programs that are trying to externalize and share that information. But I would argue that all those are, at least they still continue to be untouched by this AI world, right? Because of concerns around privacy, ethics, all these other dynamics, which I think are all still very, important topics that we need to navigate. But I think that there is still plenty of data that we have not touched. I think things like TX Gemma and others are great investigations to building out more fit for purpose models that will allow us to kind of target the results and the quality that we're looking for based on the use case.
Rich, for you, the data generation piece, any thoughts on that? What is happening? What is the next phase? Where is the industry trying to go in the R&D space specifically, or broader across in commercial manufacturing?
Well, I mean, it was expressed earlier, sort of the risk of bias, right? My previous company, Cerevel, we had a drug in schizophrenia, where you have populations of homelessness, as well as people both race and gender, which introduces all sorts of bias into the data. So the concern was really like, we can throw technology at this, but is it going to give us just the same answers in a biased sort of way? I also had a brief stint at AbbVie. Cerevel was acquired, so spent about 3 months at AbbVie during the transition, and was just sort of floored by the amount of historical data that they have. And it's unlocked and untapped, and I think they're trying to figure out what to do with it. But I think, to connect to your comments, there's also a lack of a revenue model, right? I suspect that lots of large pharma have mountains of data that maybe they don't have their own expertise or desire to utilize. But if there was a revenue model, and this maybe goes into copyright and other sources that, all the free data has been mined, and some of the data that should have been free, but semi-free. But then there's a whole other class of data that's out there that is private, and they're holding close because they don't want to give it away. They think so. Maybe it's not a technology, but it's an economics question to say, if we could figure out how to monetize that, to say I'm going to get access to these large pharma's data for the greater benefit of society, that'd be super beneficial and interesting. But again, they're going to want an economic benefit from that. So, I think those are some of the questions. Again, as we're talking about what other data can we get, got to figure out how to pay these.
Documentum stores are expensive to manage, so.
And Greenbar, and there's all sorts of, and what's the mountain?
Iron Mountain.
Iron Mountain. Yeah. There's a lot of data. There is other data out there.
There is data, yeah.
It's so interesting. For me, I agree with everything you guys are talking about. And I look at it from a little bit of a different perspective. I ask the question, what is the goal of collecting data? And, we heard, one of the use cases, which I would say is extremely important, very linear, how do we go from A to B? How do we, find a gene? How do we, use AI to give us an answer that we can find for a specific treatment for a specific patient? Amazing. But I look at it, in terms of what are we going to use the data for as different use cases. Some of them are directly commercializable, and I'm all about commercialization. That's what I live and breathe every single day. How do we take great teams, make great products, and improve humanity with commercializing these products, and then let the market decide what they're worth? I don't really have the capability of figuring that out. But for me, one of the things that we talked about, or you were talking about, was this intersection of different disciplines. For me, we can pick apart the data analysis and say we can make clinical trials better if we improve the fit between a patient and the clinical trial. So data on each patient and the data on that particular clinical trial, we should be able to harvest that. And we can make a list of these very linear things. How do we go from A to B more effectively? Because the dropout rate is one of the major causes of clinical trial failures. Same thing for placebo. How do we predict who is going to have an outsized placebo effect? We can probably use some type of psychometrics and AI to figure that out. But I would ask the other question, which is kind of, again, the big, hairy, audacious goal idea. Maybe we can use data collection to look at healthcare in a completely different way. Like, we as doctors and as scientists, we look at healthcare in a very siloed way, in a Western way, which is systems. We look at the cardiac system, we look at the CNS system, we look at the respiratory system, GI system. We don't look at the interconnectivity. Like, how does gaming interface with healthcare? Great question. How does your brain interface with your heart? And we know that there's huge connections to brain-heart, brain-gut, brain immunologic systems. So I would say, if I had a magic wand and taking me away from my directly commercializable love affair, and since Google is a place for great thinking, hence the name, Alphabet, with big risk associated and big projects, for me, it would be, how do we change the entire way that we look at patients and bring a reform to education for healthcare providers by looking at the way that things intersect? So getting the data on these different siloed pieces, but then using AI and saying, how does it all fit together? Like, where's the connected points? Because that's what AI is really good at.
Yeah. So I will have 2 points. One on this one, right? See, I have a son, plays video games for long hours, and we all worry about, does this have impact on his health? You know, physical health, mental health. Quite a few of us, we may be doing it, and there is no data being collected. So to me, you know, data could be collected from Xbox. That could potentially be linked, and research could be done to show if there were or not any effects. So, you know, this is what we call the thick data and a thin data concept. So the thick data is where you track the whole lifestyle of individuals at a global level, and you are trying to understand what is this population really doing in their lives, who walks, who doesn't walk, who's right, and then you start connecting the dots, and you can see what is really shaping the disease, right? The others, coming back to the earlier point, Sharko, that you were making, I think we all agree there are a lot of data sitting in the large pharmaceutical companies and even small pharmaceutical companies. The problem is the data is not mined or mineable. It is sitting in large Word documents, PDFs, and all that. So one thing that we are beginning to actively engage with a lot of pharma companies is on extracting the knowledge. So we are synthesizing almost, it's not synthetic data, but extracting the data so that it can be mined and collated into intelligence which can be used to now. Whether, you know, 15-year-old documents, you pulled out some information, will that be relevant or not? Maybe a question mark.
Right.
But, you know, let's say the active drug programs, right? Can we get enough information from legacy data that we can find, you know, repurpose use cases, etc.? Investigator-initiated studies. I don't think pharmas really understand what the investigators are doing with their drug when they're doing the trials in their academic settings. So there is so much information that can be actually collated. And the data generation piece, I think if the industry, we as a collective unit think about how we can improve more and get better quality data, I think it will help all the things that Tejinder was talking about. It just brings the value of that to a much more value to the industry. All right, I'll just do a quick open session for anybody, questions on this topic that we just discussed before we move to the next one.
Pretty interesting. When you were talking about the data collection part of it, so big pharma and Novartis, and a lot of data sitting in paper format, like from last 60 years, they still have it, and you know, a lot of knowledge in there. The other thing is that in data collection, I think, and maybe there's work out there, that we've got to think differently as well, as everyone is saying, because the current generation is generating the data. So it has to be roped in providing the data through apps and interest, point of interest. Yeah, as you're talking about your son, I talked to my son, he is into gaming. He is interested, but I think if there's a provision to really get that generation to be a part of this activity, instead of, you know, everyone else who is doing it, doctors and regulators and all that, that will give us the more relevant data, because they are the ones who are going to deal with the repercussions of the tools they are using. Yeah, so things that you're talking about is something that impacts them. We can think from outside as their elders, but I think it's important to utilize that community to have more interest in and again, variables are there. Yeah, so it's already hitting the market. Data is all over the place. People are selling data, but then the concept of getting the younger generation to be aware and the apps generated so that they can participate and know what they are sharing with us, which will be more I think, logical way to go forward. Yeah, because the technology is driving it, and they are the ones driving the technology. I think they are at the helm of it. We are experimenting with them, but they are the main consumers. Yeah. So, yeah.
Just have two comments that I would like to add to your questions, Vaidar. I think the large pharma companies, the top 15, 20, that have petaflops of data stored away, right? They are sharing the data, and it's up to the companies to mine. Like, and I can access some of this. They have, at least we have agreements where we're willing to share the data, and then we mine it, and it becomes our own IP. That is definitely happening. Is that available to open source or other, if anybody else is interested in mining, it's not there yet. It's large pharma company, a big fish trying to feed the big fish. That's where it sits right now. And in terms of data generation, especially in the pharma or the science field or medicine field, the way we are generating data right now is a lot more cheaper. And for example, you take NGS, right?
Yeah.
You're able to sequence the entire human genome. Like 20 years ago, it was $40,000-$50,000 a patient. Now it's like $2,000 a patient, or $1,000 a patient. So
Yeah.
the amount of data that comes from each of those are huge amounts of data. So very cheap, very easy. As Charco mentioned earlier, there was this bottleneck earlier in terms of pricing, but the data is now is easily generatable.
Well, is that also creating, my hypothesis is that all the speed of data generation and molecule generation that's happening powered by AI is now going to put more pressure on the preclinical stages.
Absolutely.
And the clinical pipelines, right? Now, so it'll have, so the industry will have to adjust as they as they look at. So before we go into that thread, let's come back and the arrival of AI agents, right? And that is the next big thing, which are almost reasoning kind of capability that has been added to AI. What is your feeling? What are some use cases that you've seen happening? And what do you think are which area of life sciences will see an explosion in agents?
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of branding and a lot of other organizations have as well around the agentic era. And at first I'll be honest, I was a little bit dismissive because agents, it's just more chatbots. But when I really sat down and really thought about it, I realized it's not so much about the interface, it's about its ability to do things and orchestrate and automate things, right? When you can have an agent operate on your behalf, right? And I think we're getting very close, right? I think you see it in a lot of coding use cases, right? If any of you are familiar, one of the new kind of trends being discussed on X, formerly known as Twitter, and other places like that, is this idea of vibe coding. I don't know if you've heard of this term, right? Where you're basically just doing prompt engineering with a model and it's building a software application for you. So you're just conversationally telling it, this is what I want to look like, this is what I've done, and this is how I want to look and feel, and this is the functionality I want in my tool, right? Kind of conversationally telling it something to code for you, essentially. And that could be, and I wonder, is there metaphorically similar models when it comes to being a principal investigator for a new molecule, right? Looking at different treatment plans, conversations as a clinician about a patient. Can I do vibe diagnosis, right? Or vibe treatment plan development? And just the accessibility by having someone to interact with, and by someone or something, maybe a better language, better choice of words, I think would be very, very interesting. Because it would also aggressively democratize access to information, right? I think one of the more prouder things that Googlers feel about Google search is how much it's democratized access to information, right?
Yeah.
And we take it very seriously to make sure that information is factual, truthful, and ethical as well. But is there a world where each individual has their own agent and they have built a certain rapport with that agent where it understands them and their preferences? Can that agent then operate into a clinical setting where there's a clinical agent with a clinician, and they can almost have their own mind meld, right? If anyone's Star Trek fan, doing a Vulcan mind meld, so there's no conversation to be had between for a bunch of like what I'll call like the superficial things or kind of the bare minimum, right? Think of the, all the Q&A that you do with the nurse as you walk into a doctor's office, even before you meet with your doctor, right? Can all that kind of just be automated through a virtual conversation between my personal agent and a clinical agent? I think would be very interesting. And then are there similar use cases that could happen in a more enterprise setting or in a research setting? And I think that's where things can get really interesting. Right now, a lot of our use cases are, let's ask this, deity-like AI and ask it to will this get through clinical trial, right? Kind of ask it a very broad, open question that even if it gave you a confident answer, you would still be a strong skeptic to the answer. But is there a model where through agentic workflows that it's much more conversational, there's much more of a chain of reasoning around this dialogue or conversation, and can you quickly get to a conclusion or a recommendation that is based on different areas, different data, different sources, through interaction of agents versus there just being a single one? I think that's where the future is going. That's my hunch.
Rich, any thoughts? Are you looking at agents already?
100%. In my space right now, my big two competitors, Novo Nordisk, Lilly, they are bigger, they have more money, maybe they're smarter, hopefully our drug is as good.
So you're getting into GLP-1?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And but maybe I can be faster, right? And to do that, if I can make my sort of individual players, data managers, pharmacovigilance, ClinOps, if I can make them smarter, or take some of the drudgery out of their job. So, my vision is, they have the little angel and devil on their shoulders, these agents that are helping them guide and hopefully be faster, right? Yeah. Can I use the technology to, again, remove some of the manual tasks, to get to information faster, for us to make decisions faster? That's maybe a way that I can compete against much larger sort of competitors to get our clinical trials successful and stuff like that. We've done similar things with Quantify specifically in the past. We developed at a previous company oversight of trip reports from our CROs. We have a regulatory requirement to provide some sampling. With Quantify, they built a DocAI based tool that read trip reports, ran it through some business rules, gave a simple red, yellow, green, summarized what the issue was. So instead of just randomly picking 10%, they could actually pick the ones that could affect the trial, that could slow us down, that would have the most amount of sort of worry about the trial. And it's also amazing, the machine has perfect memory. So the human can remember like, oh, you made the same mistake 6 months ago, so the machine knows. So again, being able to pull out things that would have been considered yellow, no, this is really red, they keep making this same mistake. So, things like that was a huge accelerant for us. And again, there's lots of these little tasks in running clinical trials and trying to get to market that, again, on the technology side, if I can add that as an accelerant to their day, hopefully, again, I can compete.
Yeah. Martin, any thoughts on agents?
One or two.
Okay.
For me, there's dozens of really great corridors to go down. But the number one for me is personalized medicine. Because we're talking very much about institutional concerns. And I really believe that the work that is now, I think, just in the prologue of the next book on personalized medicine is finally going to be a reality in the next 10 to 20 years. And it's a long game here, but personalized medicine can start with a sense of empowerment. And so there are now digital therapeutic companies that are partnering with pharma companies to improve mental health. And while many people think this is a little bit of hand waving, I think it's a start. And I do think that there is data to support the efficacy of the combination of digital therapeutic software applications with therapies derived from pharmaceutical companies. But more than that, I think that having a personal AI assistant to be able to interact with in a real-time way, if I eat this salami, what is it actually going to do for me in terms of my dreams? Now, obviously that's a big leap, but if I, exercise for 20 minutes on the treadmill here as opposed to swimming for 15 minutes, how many calories is that going to burn? And all of these pieces are about empowering individuals. You could take it all the way through to deep science. How is this pill going to interact with my genetic profile now that I've spent my $1,000 and got a complete or less, complete sequence? How is this drug going to interact with me? Because that is one of the major problems that we face as physicians. We are relying upon clinical trials which are not representative of that specific patient. So I think personalized medicine, and then if you extend it out even further, longevity, which is a whole new exciting field, which again, I think is, probably 10 to 20 years out, but looking at mitochondria, looking at how drugs interact with them for you specifically, and how does cellular repair and cellular degeneration impact you personally. You can see something immediate in a commercializable sense. Again, back to my home, skincare, hair care. How is this product going to improve my skin tone, quality, my hair? So personalized uses crossing over into the health and wellness space, and then those two other kind of extremes, which would be kind of fitness and kind of hardcore science, is where I would look for amazing new entrepreneurs to drive technology.
I think I'll take the personalized cue. So now we have like our CEO has his own persona baked into AI agent. So we can say, how will Asif answer this question? And it actually thinks on behalf of Asif and tells us the answer. So we are moving towards individual doctors based on their clinical beliefs or how they want to treat patients, or individual scientists. We are moving towards a world where we will be creating our own personas, and then agents will execute tasks based on how we would. And then this agent can interact with another agent, and they can actually decide how to resolve or take a decision, actually. So the AI agent, this is going to really bring the personalized thinking into the world of science, as we think about, debate about the potential of a drug, or, so those kind of thinkings. And as you create these debates and formulate strategies around how to do clinical trials, what populations to select, and those kind of things will actually start happening very soon. So yeah, we have been told to build our own personas. So I'm very soon going to make mine. But this is where we start. This is where agents are going to accelerate activities. I still do worry about what will people do when agents start doing everything, kind of a question. But it's still a very, very big development. Once these agents become, and now, if you see the social media, there is so much, it doesn't look like very difficult to build agents. So I think this will really accelerate very quickly and bring new ways of doing things in the industry.
I wanted to ask a question of Dr. Martin on sort of the intersection of personalized medicine and clinical trials, because we don't want our clinical trials personalized. I want you all to take the same dose at the same interval, the same visit schedule. The stats guys, they need it all to line up. So how do I test in a very structured way, and then, oh, by the way, take it whatever works for you? I mean, how do you square those two? Is it that we need to do clinical trials differently?
Yeah, such a great question. So I think the distinction is, how do we gather data to support a hypothesis, clinical trials. How do we use existing medical treatment regimens in a personalized way? Two very different standards. I would say for clinical trials, it's important to be regimented, but within that regimented framework, know that there are gaps and there are holes. So we can use the personalized medicine concept to say we need a proper demographic within this clinical trial. So AI can say, you know what? Your demographic does not accurately represent the patient population in the world. It may represent the patient population in Japan or in Bolivia or wherever. And so using AI to improve statistical significance in a personalized way is the way I would look at clinical trials.
Can I just add one? I think there is a huge emphasis in the pharma world for personalized medicine for sure, right? I mean, even in terms of dosing, you might have a flat dose, but there's also weight-dependent dosage that is given even in the context of clinical trial. Just depends.
Yeah.
It's not a uniform situation, but there is a significant push in terms of, can we personalize a certain segment of a disease, because disease is so heterogeneous, as we all know. A drug doesn't target all the patients in that patient population. So
That's cost, right? Every time I add another cohort, another population, you're doing the dial on the cost side and duration.
you need a different drug.
But if you're cutting down on using AI and cutting down on the cycle, then the cost shifts somewhere else. Yeah. So because you're adding, you're saying you want to take advantage of AI and cut down the clinical development cost based on the existing models, which will be changing.
Yep.
But then the moment you change that, then the other things come into play. People do ask about, so personalized medicine, which is the biggest thing. Pharmaceuticals like Mott's is looking into as well. How to best make use of that gap, which is currently there. So I think the cost cutting will happen one way, but there'll be addition of cost in discovering and making personalized as something will also happen in the other side as well. Yes. So.
But you could also see, at least, again, putting the commercial hat on, wouldn't you pay a subscription fee every month to know the proper dosing of a drug that you're taking for your genetic makeup?
You mean my insurance company?
Yeah. No, I mean, I would.
It comes from a magic pot.
So for me, I do a lot of sports. I rock climb, I teach sailing, I teach skiing. I've got injuries all the time. I've got aches and pains all the time. I love my ibuprofen. But I have to take a lot of ibuprofen. There's something about my genetic makeup that metabolizes the ibuprofen. I would pay, a significant amount of money out of pocket to know that the drug that I'm taking is actually going to be effective at that dose, is not going to produce side effects that's going to interfere with my stomach or other things. That would be a really interesting way to use personalized medicine and AI on that genetic level. So maybe there's a new company in there.
I will add to it. I think the progress of science is actually connecting the dots based upon the previous research. I think the way clinical trials were constructed or still are being constructed is pretty much linear and sequential. I think the current technologies, if put together properly, allow us to actually do a deep dive into the intersectionality to what Dr. Martin said. Does this drug work with a specific genetic profile and what dosage and what side effects they would like to do? I think we can get deeper insights now on how to build our protocols. And that to your point, could allow for some personalization, not absolute, some personalization in clinical trial. Somebody with a certain genetic setup should not be given a dose higher than this because they're likely to have a side effect. Right? You can have multiple arms in there based upon the genetic profile and personalized to some extent.
Side effects are a huge, huge problem that are extremely underreported. I mean, cardiac medications have just endless side effects, and they can really impact your quality of life, for example. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you
Dr.
for getting me to this conference. And I'll just give a simple example, right? Like, just to get into that, as you mentioned, healthcare is the last industry to adopt the new technologies. Rest of all other industries way ahead of healthcare or life sciences. One way. We all know the Tesla brand, right? Tesla, yes. Why that popular? It is the most intelligent car on the road today. If you take a Tesla, yes, it will actually adjust the suspension on that particular road if you are driving the Tesla. It will automatically adjust the suspension based on the parcels that are being distributed on the road. It's taking the user behaviors or user driving pattern of multiple Tesla cars driven on that particular road, pushing individualized message to my Tesla car. It automatically adjusts and giving me the best suitable ride, the softest ride that I can have. Let's take this analogy, as you mentioned, that I'll come to the digital therapeutics and these things. How much personalization has been went into this? Can we have that kind of a personalization for my clinical trial patient? I know the clinical trial patient, entire persona of that trial patient, but I don't know today whether this patient is going to complete the trial or going to drop out. If we apply some logics of this, we can able to predict certain percentage of behavior and reduce the patient drop off. And today industry rate is anything between 45% to 60% is a patient drop, and the delays are minimum 6 months. Each day in delay costs $4 million. Even if you give a 6 months to 3 months delay, you are giving a lot of money for pharma industry. Not only pharma money, it is the therapy that you are bringing into the market much faster. That's one part. On your part, Dr. Chattopadhyay, I mentioned the media and the gaming system, right? I can predict a individual behavior based on the type of movies, type of media he's watching.
Yeah.
And I can also predict the active state of a mind based on the movies or based on the persona that he is using. If I'm a psychologically depressed patient, I will use very sober movies, kind of sit in a low environment, low lighting environment. I can actually predict this particular half an hour and 2 hours, this particular patient might have a kind of a psychological disturbance. And the gaming system, right? As you mentioned, that gaming that we can talk. If I'm an aggressive person, I will always fight kind of a shooting, killing, something like this. And now your point of it, connecting brain versus heart, if the hypertension trials are being done, if I'm taking hypertension medicine, if I'm doing an aggressive game, my BP automatically goes up. But whereas you see from the data is looking at only cardiac function, my medicine of 20 milligrams for this particular patient is not reducing blood pressure in the next 10 minutes. But we are missing an essential component of this patient's behavior that's actually making the blood pressure high compared to the actually systematic disease. And these are all things are possible today, but we are not ready to adopt these kind of scenarios, but the data is available. It is only thing slice and dice of the data that can give a lot of intelligence.
You bring up a personal experience. So I had a minor surgery in the end of last year. And every time I would meet to my surgeon to do a consult, the nurse would come in and take blood pressure. Oh, your blood pressure is really high. And if I go see other doctors, it'd be a normal range. But every time I went to go visit my surgeon, my blood pressure was a little higher. And both they're like, oh, this is worrying. We see a pattern. We see that your blood pressure is just really high all year long. And then we discussed it a little bit, and I said, you know what? I think I'm a little nervous when I come and meet you.
It's not because you went to the surgery, right? You automatically get pressure of what my surgery is.
Because it's implying all these things, taking time off from work, being away from my family, recovery, pain, discomfort. And, even like in my own mind, like, I'm smart enough to kind of intellectually minimize my fears, but there's still a physical body reaction, right? There's this fight or flight that we have in us. It was just a very simple example, but you were kind of like with some of your examples around Tesla or just, playing video games, right? There have even been studies on competitive video game, players, right? And how does it affect their psychology and biology when they're playing the game, when they're training, when they're practicing and so on, right? It really burns calories. They're only sitting in a simple chair with a mouse and keyboard, but somehow it's burning calories, right? And so there's more science to be investigated there around how some of these things are interrelated.
And I think when I was listening to you, good points made, but I think that's where the bias comes into play, because not everyone would behave the way you describe it. You cannot predict. You can think that it might be, but when you collect the data, I can tell you there'll be gamers out there, people who will be so calm when they're playing it. They will be playing, games which shooting and all, but with no heartbeat being changing. So I think that's where data and its interpretation makes sense. Yeah. So it's not just the data that you can use, how you utilize the data, where you're collecting it from, and then removing the bias, which becomes not easy to remove. Yeah. So with so much data that's out there. So I do think the examples are valid from a certain perspective, but there are counterexamples which can challenge that hypothesis. Yeah. I totally agree with what you're saying. It's personalized, and that's where personalized medicine becomes a challenge. Yeah. So the variables are so many, and then you have to figure out what's the best way to go forward to minimize the bias. It will always be there because the data is so much that you can collect now with the machines and the tools that we
This is
have.
where I think certain types of agentic kind of metaphors or capabilities should be explored more, right? Like, one recent hot topic I was discussing with someone was around medical second opinions, right? And I have really strong views, and I don't practice what I preach, but I feel like for a large part, second opinions is a great best practice for any personal care, right? Because we all have our inherent biases. We're all human, right? We all have whether it's confirmation bias or other types of biases we have. But rarely do people do that because people like to just get an answer, right? I argue with my mom. My mom is Japanese, and she's very culturally accepting of authority. So as long as someone with authority, whether it's because they have a doctor in their title, or they wear a suit, or they speak more, whatever it is, a lot of these things, like, as long as they tell me what pill to take, I'll just take that pill and I'll never question it. And I won't even go back to the doctor. I'll just keep taking this pill for, indefinitely until something changes, right? Whereas my father was a pre-med dropout. So he's extremely skeptical of medicine because he knows who he went to school with and how high they were all the time. And so he's extremely skeptical about modern medicine and looked at homeopathic medicine and did a bunch of different explorations. So, I've inherited kind of both, where like part of me says, I want an authority, I want a definitive answer. Part of me recognizes that there needs to be, I think you gave a great metaphor, which was like, the devil and the angel on the shoulder, right? Maybe there's a world that we should all have a handful of agents that work with us. There's a bias busting agent. There's ones that are more authoritative. And we should let these agents almost argue amongst themselves to help me synthesize as a discussion, right? This is what we do in the real world. We have a meeting, even today, right? We're all discussing different topics. We all have slightly different views. How does AI and agents blend into that normal discord that we have in decision making, in strategy, in thought leadership, in discovery, right? That's where I think I'm really excited about the world and kind of saying, hey, for every authoritative agent I want to create for something, I want a heckler in the audience, another agent that's heckling that and challenging and questioning and understands all the key principles of bias busting, as an example. And I don't think we're there yet. I think we're still trying to get to explainability, but I think that next layer is like, how do we have a proper debate, right?
Well, I want to kind of wrap you up at this moment. Is there any key call-outs or anything you'd like to maybe dial in for the folks to wrap up this wonderful panel?
No, I think, we could have gone on for the whole
I
day.
know,
I guess.
I know,
The way we're
so-
going, it's a very interactive session.
I was actually very
It's-
interested in
it's
what you were
amazing,
saying,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
agree with everything that all of y'all said, so great points.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Charco, Rich, Dr. Martin, for a great conversation. And thank you, everybody, for participating. It was a very interactive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we're going to give you a quick little break. We do that around here, just so you don't feel like you're held too tight. So you do have some time, a little bit of time to check some emails, not too much because I will come find you, but because you went right into your panel session, you gave yourself a little bit of cushion. So we're going to meet back here at I'm going to say 11:10 so that you guys will be back here by 11:15. so that I don't have to come find you to do anything that you need, bio breaks, whatever. But thank you so much, and I appreciate it. Great time. If you gentlemen will stay, because I want to take a nice official photo.
Okay.
Other than that, everybody can run free. Okay? Thank you so much.
Thank y'all for your time.